I'm the ringer in this group. I'm the one who does not have a CEO attached to his name. I thought I'd introduce you to the real people. This is Neil Barsky, who is our founder and chairman of the board. That does not refer to the Koch brothers. It refers to Ed Koch, former mayor of New York, about whom Neil made a documentary film, although we have nothing against the Koch brothers. And this is Carol Bogert, who's here today, who's our president as of about 6 or 7 weeks ago. I figured they should share the stage with me in some way. The Marshal Project is the youngest of the 5 ventures that are here today. We launched in November 2014. We're also the only one of the 5 that covers a specific subject. It's a big subject, the American criminal justice system, which includes policing, prosecution and defense, the judiciary, sentencing, jails and prisons, probation, parole, reentry, juvenile justice. We also pay a lot of attention to drug laws and immigration, which are 2 sort of pathways into the criminal justice system. And we write about race, which infuses every aspect of how this country handles crime and punishment. African Americans make up 13% of the population in the United States. They make up 37% of those who are incarcerated and 40% of the victims of murder. At the Marshal Project, we do 3 things. First, we do original reporting, which we publish on our own website, but also in partnership with larger outlets. Partnering has been a huge success for us. It expands our audience dramatically and allows us to target specific demographics, and sometimes it helps us defray costs. Our work appears in the New York Times, the Washington Post, on All Things Considered and This American Life, in magazines like The Atlantic and Wired, on Vice, Ebony.com, Matter, 538, Slate, and dozens of other outlets. We've partnered with 2 of my fellow panelists, the Texas Tribune and ProPublica, and we've discussed joint ventures with the other 2 panelists. Some of our work is investigative, like this particular piece on the little-known practice of double solitary. That's when prisons put 2 violent inmates together in a cell smaller than a parking space. You can probably guess how that works out. Some of our work is explanatory, like this column examining why the crime rate went down. Some of it is narrative, like this piece, collaboration with ProPublica and This American Life about how police mishandled a case of rape. It's won a number of awards and has been bought for a possible TV series. Sometimes we tell our stories with interactive graphics. This one is, which we're particularly proud of, is called The Next to Die. It's the first tool to track upcoming executions. About 3,000 Americans are on death row awaiting execution. For a piece on what prisoners are allowed to read, we built a quiz inviting readers to guess which books and magazines were banned. So that's the original journalism. The second thing we do is we provide a platform for commentary and argument. We help academics translate complicated social science into accessible essays, like this one on why it is that African Americans don't trust the courts. We organize dialogues on Facebook, Dig, and Reddit. This is one on Dig about solitary. We publish a weekly feature called Life Inside, usually written by prison inmates, but sometimes by others who work in or are caught up in the criminal justice system. And one of our plans for the next year is to expand our role as a hub for robust debate of all of these issues that we cover. The third thing we do is we distribute a daily newsletter called The Opening Statement, which aggregates the most interesting news and opinion on crime and punishment from around the country, including our own work, but also reporting and commentary drawn from scores of other publications. The newsletter serves as an indispensable daily briefing for people who make up our core audience: advocates, policymakers, practitioners, journalists, and scholars. I want to touch briefly on 3 questions that I expect are going to come up in our conversation this afternoon. How do we measure success? What's the difference between journalism with a mission and advocacy? And how solid is the business model? So what's success? This is always a tricky question where journalism is concerned, and it's especially tricky in the nonprofit world, because donors want something more than we published a bunch of great stories. Unlike some nonprofits, we can't offer a kind of tangible measure that makes philanthropists glow with pleasure. Hungry people fed, numbers of vulnerable children vaccinated, schools equipped with new computers. We've had excellent growth in the conventional traffic metrics. Everything's headed in the right direction. These are the page views, uniques, Facebook friends, and email subscribers. But those numbers, we all know, don't tell the whole story and sometimes tell a kind of misleading story. They can't tell you how much of the story someone read or whether a piece made someone think. The case we make for the Marshal Project is, first, that we have established a credible, respected brand. In our first full year of operations, we've won several major prizes, including a Polk Award for our investigative work, for great storytelling, for interactive graphics, and for web design. We collaborate with the best in the business. We're on the front pages of the New York Times and the Washington Post. Our widely praised partnership with ProPublica, the one called An Unbelievable Story of Rape, reached more than 1 million readers online and millions more on the radio. At the White House, we interviewed President Obama and moderated a panel discussion that included the president. So we've made a name for ourselves. The second sign of success is that we know our journalism has some impact. We've seen judges on the most important benches in the nation, including the Supreme Court, cite our stories in their opinions. Our reporting on guard brutality in New York prisons, published with the New York Times here, helped sparked a federal investigation and a pledge of reforms by state authorities. An investigation of parole boards, which ran on the front page of the Washington Post, helped win one featured inmate an early parole hearing. And that rape story that I've referred to before, police academies, hospital trauma departments, and universities are now using it as a teaching tool for how to treat cases of sexual assault, and more specifically, how not to do that. A third sign of success, and in some ways the most important to us, is that we've been a catalyst stimulating wider and better coverage of criminal justice. Obviously, we don't take credit for everything that everybody writes in this area, and it's been a kind of bumper year or year and a half of coverage, partly driven by events, but through our partnerships with dozens of other news outlets and through our example, we've helped enlarge a national conversation about the bureaucratic dysfunction, waste, and abuse in the American story of crime and punishment. We know that among the many people who follow our work are a lot of journalists, and nothing makes us happier than when we see our reporting has inspired imitation. The question of what's the difference between a mission and advocacy, this is our mission statement. I won't read it. I'll save a little bit of time doing that, but I'm often asked by people who write about the media, how is this not advocacy? And I think the people on this panel will all agree with me that the notion that powerful institutions, especially public institutions, should be held accountable is not the same as advocacy. It's basic journalism. In the case of the Marshal Project, our objective is to shine a bright light on the institutions that exercise the most serious power any government has, the power to deprive a citizen of liberty and sometimes life. We go into stories with an open mind and a sense of fairness. We check our facts, we test our conclusions. We aim to write about successes as well as failures, but always with an appropriate measure of skepticism. Finally, a quick note on the business model. To distinguish ourselves from struggling traditional media, I describe us as nonprofit on purpose. For the 8 years when I was editor of the New York Times, fundraising meant getting on an elevator, riding up to the publisher's office, and explaining that if he took $1 million out of the newsroom budget, Western civilization as we know it would come to an end. Nonprofit fundraising is a little more complicated. Most nonprofits depend on the generosity of many donors who may have different expectations. Some accept that journalism is a worthwhile end in itself, many don't. Some are impressed by big traffic numbers, others want to see concrete impact, laws passed, or bad guys indicted. Some funders are happy to support general operations, others want to invest in a specific beat. Some want you to be advocates. They want every piece to include a call to action. And some funders have short attention spans. You never know when they might get distracted by a shiny new cause or a whole new medium. This is a list of our major funders. When I was considering whether to leave the New York Times after 30 years and take this job, I called my friend Paul Steiger, formerly of the Wall Street Journal and who helped launch ProPublica back in 2008. And Paul's advice was, before you launch, it's wise to have 2 years' worth of money lined up. ProPublica actually started with 3 years in the bank. Of course, we completely ignored his wisdom and started without a full year of commitments. And we've paddled really hard to keep our heads above water, and so far, we're still breathing air.